This is video 2 for Euro for March 25th. Now moving on from Henry's Protestant Reformation to now the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Although it took several decades to be effective, eventually there was a Catholic response to the Protestant Reformation. Initially, historians refer to this movement as the Catholic Counter-Reformation, although today is more commonly known as the Catholic Reformation. To a certain extent, both labels are appropriate. It was a counter-reformation in the sense that Catholic Church was taking steps to counteract some of the successes of the Protestant side. Among these steps was the creation of the notorious Index of Prohibited Books, or just the Index, including the works by writers like Erasmus and Galileo. Also, the medieval institution of the Papal Inquisition was revived, and individuals who were deemed to be heretics were put to death for their religious beliefs. The term Catholic Reformation is also apt in that the Catholic Church has a long tradition of adjusting to changed conditions, whether it was the papal reform movement of the 11th century or the more recently the Second Vatican Council of the 1960s. The centerpiece of the Catholic Reformation was the Council of Trent. Unlike the medieval conciliar movement, which sought to place the papacy under the control of the Church Council Parliament, the Council of Trent was dominated by the papacy and in turn enhanced its power. The council took steps to address some of the issues that had sparked the Reformation, including placing limits on simony, the selling of church offices. Recognizing that the poorly educated clergy were a major problem, the council mandated that a seminary for the education of clergy should be established in every diocese. The Council of Trent refused to concede any point of theology to Protestants. Instead, they emphatically endorsed their traditional teachings on such matters as the sacraments, the role of priests, and the belief that salvation comes from faith as well as works, and that the source for this faith was the Bible and the traditions of the Church. Although it is incorrect to say that the council created the idea of the Baroque style of art, the council was critical on what was deemed to be religious failings of the Mannerist style and urged that a more intensely religious art be created, something that did play a role in the development of early Baroque. Perhaps the greatest reason for the success of the Catholic Reformation was the founding of the Society of Jesus for the Jesuits, organized by Ignatius Loyola, a Spanish noble who was wounded in battle and spent his recuperation time reading various Catholic tracts. After undergoing a religious conversion, he attempted, not unlike Luther, to reconcile himself to God through austere behavior. He became a hermit, but still felt that something was amiss. While Luther, in his search for spiritual contentment, decided that the Bible was a source of faith, Loyola believed that even if the Bible did not exist, there were still the spirits. Loyola's ideas are laid out in the spiritual exercises. One passage in particular states his belief in total obedience to the Church. To arrive at complete certainty that this is the attitude that we should maintain, I will believe that... I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to move on. All right. This total and complete loyalty in which is why the Jesuit order, although at first under suspicion by a cautious papacy, uncomfortable with Loyola's mysticism, would be accepted as an official order of the Church in a papal bull in 1540. The Jesuits began to distinguish themselves as a teaching order and also worked as Catholic missionaries in places where Lutheranism had made large inroads. Poland served as a strong example of where Catholicism was re-Protestantized. Excuse me, let me reshift myself here. All right, the Portuguese and Spanish empires. All right, kind of shifting away now from Reformation now towards exploration. So kind of back into topic 1 or unit 1 that the AP Euro has. All right, Portuguese and Spanish empires. If geography is destiny, then it's not surprising that the Portuguese would look to the sea. Living in a land that was not well suited to farming, the Portuguese had always looked to distant lands for sources of wealth. In 1415, Prince Henry the Navigator, the younger son of King of Portugal, participated in the capture of the North American port of Ceuta from the Muslims. This conquest spurred his interest in Africa. It also inspired him to sponsor a navigational school in Lisbon in a series of expeditions manned mainly by Italians, which aimed not only to develop trade with Africa, but also to find a route to India and the Far East around Africa, and thereby cut out the Italian middlemen. In 1487, a Portuguese captain, Bartholomew Diaz, sailed around the Cape of Good Hope around the tip of Africa. A decade later, in 1498, Vasco da Gama reached the coast of India. The Portuguese defeated the Arab fleets that patrolled the Indian Ocean by being the first to successfully mount cannons on their ships and also by deploying their ships in squadrons rather than individually, which gave them a huge tactical advantage. The Portuguese established themselves on the western coast of India and for a while controlled the lucrative spice trade. This is like late 1400s. With the Portuguese having a head start in the African route to the Indian Ocean, the Spanish decided to try the Atlantic route to the east instead. Christopher Columbus, a Genoese sailor, set sail on August 2nd, 1492, certain that he would find the eastern route. Although Columbus was not unique in insisting the world was round, he did believe that he would fulfill medieval religious prophecies that spoke of converting the whole world to Christianity. After a 33-day voyage from the Canary Islands, Columbus landed in the eastern Bahamas, which he insisted was an underdeveloped part of Asia, which is why he called the West Indies. He called the territory the Indies and the indigenous people there Indians, and noted ominously in his diary that they were friendly and gentle and therefore easy to enslave. Although Columbus's failure to locate their gold or spices during his voyages were a disappointment, within a generation, others built on Columbus's discoveries. The most important of these journeys was undertaken by Ferdinand Magellan in 1519, who set out to circumnavigate the globe. Although Magellan did not live to see the end of the voyage, he died in the Philippines, he did prove that the territory where Columbus landed was not part of the Far East, but rather an entirely unknown continent, a continent the Spanish planned to conquer. In 1519, Hernan Cortes landed on the coast of Mexico with a small force of 600 men. He had arrived at the heart of the Aztec Empire, a militaristic state which, through conquest, had carved out a large state with a large central capital, Tenochtitlan, modern-day Mexico City. The Aztecs were less than popular with the people they conquered, primarily because they practiced human sacrifice to appease their gods. These conquered people felt no loyalty to the Aztec state and were willing to cooperate with the Spanish. The Aztecs viewed the light-skinned Spaniards who were riding on horses, unknown to at the time North and South of America, wearing armor and carrying guns as gods. At first, Moctezuma, the Aztec ruler, tried to appease them with gifts of gold. Unfortunately for the Aztecs, this just further whetted the appetite of the Spanish, who seized the capital and took Moctezuma hostage. He died mysteriously with the Spanish in captivity. While rebellions against Spanish rule continued, the Aztec ability to fight was sapped by smallpox and other European diseases foreign to the indigenous peoples. By 1521, Cortes declared the former Aztec Empire to be New Spain. The Spanish also succeeded in destroying another great civilization, the Incan Empire, Peru. Like the Aztecs, the Incas had carved out a large empire by conquering and instigating harsh rule over their many other tribes. In 1531, Francisco Pizarro, a Spanish soldier, set out for Peru with a tiny force of approximately 200 men. Pizarro, following Cortez's brutal example, treacherously captured the Inca Empire, Atahualpa, who then had his subjects raise vast amounts of gold for ransom. By 1533, Pizarro had grown tired of the ruling through Atahualpa, and he had him killed. Once again, Western technology and diseases sapped the indigenous population's ability to fight, and while it took longer for the Spanish to secure their hold over the Inca territories, by the 1560s, they had stamped out the last bit of the resistance. The impact of this age of exploration and conquest was immense, not just for the Europe, but for the entire globe. The Spanish set out to create haciendas, or plantations, to exploit both the agricultural and mineral riches of the land. The indigenous population, compelled to work under a system of forced labor called encomienda, continued to die at an incredible pace from under a system of forced labor called encomienda, continued to die at an incredible pace from both disease and overwork. So to provide labor from their estates, the Spanish and Portuguese began to capture Africans from their homeland to serve out on the farms and the mines of the New World. It's been estimated that by the time the slave trades ended in the 19th century, almost 10 million Africans were abducted from Africa, with countless numbers dying as a result of the inhumane conditions of difficult overseas passages. All right, another consequence of the Spanish and Portuguese Empire in the New World was what became known as the Columbian Exchange, the transatlantic transfer of animals, plants, and diseases, people, technology, and ideas among Europe, Americas, and Africa. As Europeans and Africans crisscrossed the Atlantic, they brought the Old World to the New World and back again. From Europe and the African side, they brought horses, pigs, goats, chili peppers, and sugarcane to the New World. And from the American side, squash, beans, corn, potatoes, and cacao, and more back to the East. Settlers from the Old World carried bubonic plague, smallpox, typhoid, influenza, and the common cold into the new and carried chagas and syphilis back to the old. Guns, Catholicism, and slaves also crossed the Atlantic. Never before had so much been moved across the oceans as ship and after ship carried the contents of the continent to the other. So we look at the key concepts real quick. All right, so this is kind of wrapping up the Reformation. Some Protestants, including Calvin and the Anabaptists, refused to recognize the subordination of the church to the secular state. Religious conflicts became a basis for challenging monarchs' control of those religious institutions. War of religion, we're not really there. Only to any of those. Catholic Reformation. The Catholic Reformation, exemplified by the Jesuit order and the Council of Trent, revived the church, but cemented division within Christianity. I'm going back to Unit 1 to cover some of that foreign travel stuff. Let's see. All right, looking at technological advances in age exploration. Advances in navigation, cartography, and military technology enable Europeans to establish overseas colonies and empires. European states sought direct access to gold, spices, and luxury goods to enhance personal wealth and state of power. The rise of mercantilism gave the state a new role of promoting commercial developments and the acquisition of colonial overseas. Christianity was a stimulus for exploration as governments and religious authorities sought to spread their faith, and for some it served as justification for subjugation of indigenous cultures. Europeans established overseas empires and trade networks through coercion and negotiation. The Spanish established colonies across the Americas, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, which made Spain a dominant state in Europe in the 16th century. The Atlantic nations of France, England, and Netherlands followed it by establishing their own colonies and trading networks to compete with Portuguese and Spanish dominance in the 17th century. The competition for trade led to conflicts and rivalries among European powers in the 17th century. Columbian exchange. The Portuguese established a commercial network along the African coast in South and East Asia, in South America in the late 15th and throughout the 16th centuries. Europe's colonial expansion led to a global exchange of goods, flora and fauna, a shift towards European dominance, and the expansion of the slave trade. The exchange of goods shifted the center of economic power in Europe from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic states and brought the latter into the expanding world economy. The exchange of new plants, animals, and diseases, the Columbian exchange, created economic opportunities for Europeans. Europe's colonial expansion led to a global exchange of goods, flora, fauna, cultural practices, and diseases, resulting in the destruction of some indigenous civilizations and a shift towards European dominance and the expansion of slave trade. The exchange of new plants, animals, and diseases, the Columbian exchange, in some cases, facilitated European subjugation and destruction of indigenous peoples, particularly in the Americas. That's it. Yeah, we'll stop.